Welcome everybody to another BIM broadcast episode. We're talking with BIMBOX today, which is fantastic. In fact, we're going to be joined by Buck Davis and Anthony here in just a moment. Let me get the screen. We'll merge this across here. Hey Buck, hey Anthony, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you doing today?
Oh, doing great.
Let me
Doing
unmute.
great. Glad
Hello.
you could make it. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, Buck, I hear tell you just had a fun little run from the airport to get here.
Yeah, man. The Tampa airport to
Right.
Jacksonville. Couldn't get a car. They had a couple conventions that just hit. And add to that the traffic on 75 going to Atlanta for the Super Bowl. So
Nice.
we
Nice.
were racing the whole way up here to get to Jacksonville to join this podcast. So I'm glad I made it.
Yeah, we're glad you made it as well. We're so glad you made it.
Yeah,
So,
no kidding.
let's introduce this series that we're about to do, and I'll introduce the two of you in a bit more detail here in just a moment. But let's talk about this series we're gonna be discussing. We're gonna be doing a series on hardware and how the hardware affects your modeling within Revit, how it affects the speed, the access to the models, the saving, all of this. We're gonna cover a ton of aspects. Today we're going to be discussing just like the intro. How can you benchmark yourself? How can you get some of this info? But in future discussions, we're going to go into some detail talking about things like processors, talking about RAM, talking about graphics card, and all these kind of factors that play together to make the Revit model perform at its optimal rate, right? So joining me today is Buck Davis. He's the president CEO of BIMBOX Computers, BIMBOX USA, and Anthony Remus, the chief building director. Is that the right title, Anthony? What do you want me to call you?
That works fine. It's I actually forget it as well, but it's a marketing or a product director,
Product director.
manufacturing.
Yep.
It changes from time to time.
Right, right. So it's kind of like my title here. So I work at a company called CTC Software, and we'll take a look at some tools and the websites for both of our companies here in just a minute. But
Cool.
internally, I think they call me the Revit nerd or something like that. So whatever, doesn't really matter.
It's all good.
No,
So
Anthony is actually the mastermind behind all the overclocking, RAM timings, the high-speed performance of our drives. He's kind of the R&D master. Anything coming down the pipeline, we were talking about 28 core Intels for laser scanning a second ago. So that's kind of it. He's being humble.
the brain
Yeah.
behind the build.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Buck pushes the envelope, and I try to meet his standards.
We want it to do such and such. Make it go.
That's
Yeah,
pretty much
man.
what he's going to be.
It's like the
That's
next
how it
generation, right?
started.
Make it so, number one.
Yeah.
All right. So, Anthony, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background? We'll keep this short, but where you came from and how you got started in this hardware side.
Yeah, honestly, it's enthusiast based. I've been working around computers since the early 2000s, and you know, the overclocking aspect that is so important to what we do has really just come. It's like a hot rod background, just tinkering and doing it. I was the forum moderator for overclock.net for a few years, um, but the computer aspect of me is mostly School of Hard Knocks, just from putting in years and years of doing this on my own and for my own business before collaborating with BIMBOX.
Right.
So
Awesome. And Buck, you've been on the show before, but give me a little bit of a story about your background. How did you get where you are right now?
I started out as a civil project manager. The market tanked in 2008, got into high-end residential design and modeling, then went to work for a Autodesk advisor part of the construction space, laser scanning drones, BIM 360, mobile field technologies, and then started working for Balfour Beatty Construction on the project solutions BDC side, working on big projects, crunching, laser scanning, and found the need for personal need for better hardware. For me and my team, started building it.
Yep.
Started BIMBOX about 3 years ago, and we've been off to the races. Met Anthony about a year ago. We were looking for someone to step into the role of really kind of R&D, product development, quality control. And he was introduced to me by Aaron Maurer, who said, "You got to meet this guy." We drove up to meet him with my current business partner, Anthony Rudra, and we hit it off, and we've been kind of having a good time ever since, right?
Perfect.
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. That's awesome. Well, before we get
Well,
too far into this series, for those of you who are joining us live, we want to let you know some information that's really important for you and for future live shows for that matter. We're going to be doing a giveaway, two giveaways actually. We're going to be giving away a BIMBOX piece of hardware, one of the computers that Buck's picked out to be given away at the end of this series. And CTC Software, my company, is going to be giving away a BIM project suite add-in for Revit. It will be given away to two different people. So someone's going to get the computer, and someone's going to get the Revit add-in. We're going to be asking questions at the ends of our shows, and in some cases asking you to hit us up and interact live during the show. And there'll be different criteria, but at the very end, whoever meets that criteria at least once will be entered into the drawing, and then we'll kind of announce in the kind of closing show who gets it. So, that sound good, Buck? Anthony?
that sounds good. We might even
Yep.
sweeten the deal if we start talking about point cloud processing and us throw in one of our 2 terabyte NVMe RAID drives, which would be pretty
Nice.
sweet for someone who does RAID and processing.
Nice.
So we will have a twofer right here from our side. We'll give away some stuff.
Excellent. So, guys, stay tuned. Make sure that you're paying attention to the show if you want to win some sweet hardware and some fantastic top-of-the-line Revit add-ins. All right. We already introduced you guys, but let's start talking about this information straight away. We're talking Revit. We're talking building information modeling, and since Revit is one of the foremost tools in the world of building information modeling, we're going to focus on it and its performance first. Obviously, there's a ton of other tools that come into play, right? You've got tools like Revisto and Enscape and Max and Navisworks and all kinds of other tools, Civil 3D. And each of those tools, depending on what your focus is, they're going to have their own hardware requirements, sort of, things that makes the computer run optimally for it. For today's discussion, we're going to focus primarily on Revit, and in a lot of cases, we're going to focus on Revit throughout this kind of series here, but we'll tie some parallels and talk about some benchmarking tools you guys can use for some of those other tools as well. Buck, Anthony, do you guys want to add anything to that?
Anthony, you
That's
got anything?
pretty good right there, starting off with that.
Awesome.
That's a good
So I'm going to start out with a
point.
question here. We're gonna do a little Q&A a bit today and kind of see where this goes. Buck, Anthony, what is the most important thing that you need to have in place to make Revit run perfectly?
Anthony, I'll let you kick that off.
I would
It's a
say
trick
hands
question on
down.
purpose.
Well, from my aspect on the hardware side, like the CPU is the most important aspect. It's obviously it's a complete system from the hardware to the software to the training. But on the hardware side, the most critical thing is single core performance, high clock speeds, and that's all from the CPU.
Right. Buck?
I feel like next show we need to have those little whiteboards so Anthony, I can hold them up to see if we're in alignment on these answers, right?
That'd be great.
Clock speed's going to be key. Is definitely number one. I would say after that, drive speed would be the second most important thing for me. RAM capacity, if you're like an Aaron or even you dealing with massive files, you could run into RAM problems. But clock speed overall is the number one performance gauge.
That's the top thing. Now, I got to thinking while I was kind of prepping for this show, and I was like, for people who aren't necessarily computer gurus, how can I tie this discussion in to what they might understand in sort of layman's terms? And maybe you guys can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I kind of view the process of building information modeling and the building of a computer or selecting of a computer a lot like picking out a new car. It depends on what you're going to be doing, right? If you're a Formula One racer, you want a certain kind of car. If you're a rally racer doing dirt track race, you want a different kind of car with different specs, right? It's not just one thing. You don't just buy a car for everything. Well, I mean, you can buy a car for everything. You can buy a computer for everything, but it's not going to do the best at everything that you may want it to do, right? My guys over in the dev team just next door to me here, they are all about off-roading, right? Four-wheeling, and they have tuned precision vehicles, Jeeps they're all Brandis over there, so they're all Jeeps, but you know, it's
Just
all
empty
like,
every pocket.
and yeah, right, exactly. It's just your paycheck goes straight to the dealership or whomever, right?
Yeah.
But it's very much the same thing with the computer, right? When you're doing something for Revit, or when you're doing something for Revisto or Enscape or Max or Civil 3D, you want to precision tune that.
Exactly. I often tell clients some of these Xeon workstations are like a big rig, and a BIMBOX, a tuned system's like, you know, your Porsche.
Right.
You don't need the big rig for a lot of the general stuff that you're doing in Revit. So that's actually an analogy I use often with people.
Nice. Well,
Well,
again,
and
there's
I'd
that
even take it a
whiteboard thing, right? Like, are we on the same page?
I'd even
That's
take it a
great.
step further, though. You know, when you if you're like sports cars, right? That might be your entry level Revit user. You can go get a GT Mustang or go get a Corvette. That's a fast car, right? But when you're a
Yeah.
professional race car driver, your tires matter depending on what track matters, your gear alignment.
Yeah.
Everything has to be humming on all cylinders. So while we say CPU is important, you could have four computers with the same CPU and you're not going to see the great performance. You know, if you put slick
Oh
tires
yeah.
on a Jeep, you're not really climbing that mountain like you thought you were, even though you have the same Jeep and the same engine, right? So
Right.
it gets
Yeah.
down into the minutia, right? So that's one of the things Jeep
Yeah.
does well is you get a stock Jeep that's got mountain tires and has a roll cage and has all this other stuff, and it's pretty much a stock car ready to go out there. But all the
But
accoutrement, everything that adds on is really what makes it sweet.
but that same exact Jeep isn't the one you're going to take to the drag strip, right? I mean, it's all
No,
about the
Yeah,
purpose of what you're doing.
I would say what we do at
completely.
BIMBOX is we're getting those factory cars like the Porsches and whatnot, and we're just tuning them for the racetrack is essentially what we're doing. I mean, we're building them all in-house, but we're getting specs that, you know, you might see at some of our competitors, but we're fine-tuning them, like Buck said, you know, like we're looking at temperatures. Temperatures are huge.
Right.
There's a whole ecosystem that goes along with that. It's not just, hey, that's the same CPU as these two competitors, I'm going to get the cheapest one. It's about what went into the system. So
Well,
Exactly.
and it also comes down to users, right? So we talked about Inkscape, we talked about, Revisto. Do we have a user that's going to do a 30-minute presentation for a client, or is this a user that's going to be sitting there modeling all day, looking at Inkscape in a view on a third monitor, full force, upgrading files? Because once again, that is a different user type, and we want to spec the hardware appropriate for that person. So,
Right.
you know, that really does come down to the end user. And I guess you could even want to continue the analogy of how they drive. How rough on the computer are they? How many files do they keep open at once? Do they like to upgrade all the files at once? Or are they okay to upgrading them in line? You know, and that can change the required specification.
Yep. Absolutely. So, how do you measure speed? I mean, in a car, it's easy, right? You get a an accelerometer to tell, you know, check how fast it's taking off. You can do dyno test to figure out the power. But on a computer, how do you check that? How do you validate that something's actually faster? I mean, what I don't want to have happen is someone go, well, this feels fast because I just came off a super slow computer, so this is way fast, right? But is it really
yeah.
as fast as it could be? Is it emotionally fast? Like I'm sitting in a Porsche and I feel like I'm going fast, or is it truly fast? How do you measure?
That comes down to benchmarks. So it's actually not very difficult to do that for computers as well. It's just most people don't know the tools that are out there. Benchmarking is critical. And in some ways, the benchmarks that you'll find without making your own in-house one, they're a bit limited. They're only maybe testing for at most minutes at a time.
Sure.
But there's tools like Cinebench. Chaos Group released a V-Ray benchmark, and even though like, hey, I don't use V-Ray, what's it matter to me? But you're still getting data and good information, so you could compare between similar hardware.
Right.
Cinebench is one of my favorite tools actually because you could test single core performance and multi-core all in one, and it comes down to knowing how to use your benchmark. So 90% of the people that might use Cinebench may not realize there's an advanced tab to open up the single core performance. So in default view, you don't even get single core performance. It just tests your multi-core and your GPU.
Right.
But it's about using the benchmarks, knowing how to use them, and then you could genuinely get an apples to apples. The most important benchmark, though, if you really wanted to know, is you got to create one with the actual software you're using. Hey, in-house, we do this all day, every day. Well, get a system, test it, time it, or do whatever, create a measurement you could actually reproduce, and that's how you would find out in like real world. But these are great synthetic benchmarks that, you know, it's easy for anyone to compare products.
Right.
Well,
now, let's tie it into Revit directly. Buck, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say big shout out to companies like V-Ray and Gordon Price and Phil and them that made these RFO benchmarks application specific. Otherwise, it's you kind of need to know what the benchmark's checking for and how that applies to the software you're using, which is something we're good at, but it can be a challenge. So just at
the big thing is to make sure it's repeatable. Buck, I think I just lost your audio.
Okay. Am I back?
There, you're back. All right. Wasn't sure if you were self-muting yourself or something. All right.
No.
So let's talk about Revit specifically, since that's kind of the focus of BIM broadcast primarily, is around the BIM workflow here. You brought up Gordon Price and the RFO benchmark. Now, we have across the top here a whole bunch of other benchmarks that check just computer stuff, right? Graphics cards.
Right.
There's a hard drive test. I think Cinebench, or rather Afterburner, does one of the two does like a processor testing. But when you said specifically checking the actual workstation, the actual software, in this case for Revit, RFO benchmark is the way to go, right? This is what you guys use, I believe, for your benchmarks?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So, and the nice thing about this, again, when you're doing something that's standardized, that is repeatable, that the industry is doing, you can share this around and get inputs from other sources. You can go, hey, so-and-so client, how does yours run? Or hey, so-and-so competitor, and you guys can start comparing what's going on. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
And this is huge for us. I mean, apples to apples, our industry is about analytics. It's how do we have a conversation with a client to be able to discuss whether they have the right tool or they need something else. And it's kind of like, you go get a physical, they check your weight, height, blood pressure, take some blood, and then they look at the results, right? This is kind of the way that we actually can do that with a client or prospective client to find out how either sick or well they are, right? If your score comes in where we think it should, 90 or under, you probably have a good system. There might be something we could tweak on your existing system, but if you're in the 100 to 120, there's definitely a value proposition to make an investment in hardware. If you're over 120, you're brutal. You're losing money bad.
Now let's tie this into some reality here. I want to make sure we're talking real numbers. When you're saying numbers like 80s and 100s and 120s, that the people listening to this show understand exactly what that means. So I've run some benchmarks. In fact, let me minimize this. I got 3 different benchmarks here. One of them's from a competitor of yours. One of these is from an internal build that one of our guys did a couple of years ago. And one of these is my laptop that I'm actually recording this show on right now. And pretty soon, I'll be getting my hands on one of your workstations, one of your really badass laptops. And I'm going to be doing a benchmark on there as well, and we'll kind of do a circle around on this. But when you're talking these numbers, where do I find this number that you're talking about, so that if I run a benchmark in my firm, I know how to compare apples to apples?
So when you look at these, and one of the things we first want to look at is at the top, you see this is Revit 2018. You want to run, and if you're comparing apple to apple, you want to run in the same year. Some of these journal entries, some of these files that we use can change, and that can change some of the time. So one, just to let you know, an RFO benchmark run in Revit 2019 is not apples to apples to our RFO benchmark run version 2018. The next thing you'll see in here is the full standard set.
May I add one thing to that real quick, Buck?
Yep.
Subversion is also, I think, just as critical. 2019.1.31 is different than 2019.02.3 or whatever it is. So you need to kind of make sure you're on the same build of Revit, not just the same version. So in my case, this truly is not an apples to apples because I had run this on 2018, and then the other two workstations were on the second to latest build of 2019. So while we're
One other thing,
it's not the same. Go ahead, Anthony.
Sorry, Sean. One other thing too is whether or not the benchmark was run on a fresh install or a fresh boot versus, you know, even Windows updates. When a lot of these Spectra updates came in down the pipeline, they actually slowed down scores a little bit. So keep in mind, like, the build of Windows affects scores as well. Not generally as much, but be mindful of what you have in the background going on as well.
No, I don't
I guarantee you
RFO benchmark tracks that, does it?
It does not.
I don't. It might at the very bottom. I think it does.
Real quick.
Oh, does it? This is why Anthony does it.
I have the OS, but I don't know that it tells me the exact build of the OS. Yeah, I don't see it.
Okay. And here's another thing with the RFO benchmark. Keep in mind, it never reports your actual RAM speed. I think it reports the default of the chipset. It won't. So a lot of our benchmarks, sometimes we're at least 3200 megahertz. It'll never actually report 32. So it'll say whatever the default for the chipset is.
Sure. Okay, so thank you for that, Anthony. Buck, you were saying about, first of all, the Revit build being important, and again, I'm not obviously on apples to, actually, I thought I was apples to apples. No, I am. Look, this is the date, guys. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I did run all these on Revit 2018.
Correct.
So when I saw 19 was the right, I was wondering.
Yep, that was because I ran these two yesterday.
Well, so the next thing we want to look at is the full standard set. One of the things that we encourage, and it takes a little bit more time, is to make this test as true to life as possible. A standard set puts your computer under maybe 15 or 20 minutes of stress during Revit. When we look at our clients and people that are doing drafting, detailing, modeling all day long, that's really an 8-hour workflow, if not longer than that, right? That's an 8-hour process. So we encourage people, if they have time or on a Friday or an evening, to run extended test. Extended test is going to put your system under the thermal throttling and heat that you get throughout the day. And when I say that, Sean, a lot of people at the end of the day experience their computer feeling slow and laggy. It's not the same, bright and early it was in the morning, and that's due to thermal throttling. So to give you a real life apples to apples, you also need to run the extended version, not just a simplified test.
I think also to add to that, at different intervals throughout that, you have to start doing things like opening up email, opening up 75 Chrome tabs, because that happens throughout the day, and that also eats up a bit of RAM.
It does.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a guy. Maybe it was you who told me this, but I think I saw an image that there was this guy who built this amazing system. Right? It had like, I don't know, a ton of processors and like 256 gig of RAM or something ridiculous, and the caption said something like, "This is my Chrome workstation."
There was a funny meme that went around just recently where there was like Corsair cookie, like RAM stick cookies. And there's a guy that walks in with a Chrome, icon on his shirt, and he starts eating some of the cookies. Then an Adobe Photoshop guy comes in and eats a cookie and tries to get another, which the cookie symbolizes RAM. And then he goes to grab another stick, and Chrome pushes them away and eats all the RAM. And it's true because, man, like sometimes Chrome will really hog up. I have IT guys that sometimes need 32 gigs of RAM just because they have so many Chrome tabs open. They might be doing, remote instances and all kinds of stuff, and it's something you got to watch out for.
Right on. So
nice.
Kyle wrote in and said, "Hey, what's up, Buck?"
Oh, Kyle is one of our clients. He's awesome, man. With the Devil Group, drywall contractor, they just stocked up a bunch of BIMBOXes, and Kyle is the man. He's actually, Sean, his first thing he told me was, "I don't believe in ROIs."
That's the guy you were telling me about who was all about the ROIs.
Yeah, this is Kyle. So Kyle has since then shared his ROI calculator, which is really it's great numbers. You know, I think he did a really good job. They based their ROI, which is another thing. You know, when we're looking at this benchmark, if you look down at the number 149.64, you see all those different activities that are shown: opening and loading custom templates,
Yep.
creating the floor levels and grids. When you're talking to someone who tells you that they don't believe in ROI, talking about this, you know, how often do my guys do that? How often do they create exterior curtain walls? How do I get a hard number out of this? Kyle's ROI was simply on opening and closing files, right? You open up Revit on your existing machine, click. You open it up on a competing machine, and that delta is a hard number times how many times you guys open up the files every day, times how many people you open up files every day. And that's a very hard ROI number that you can take to management and say, we're wasting hours. And I think in his instance, it was conservatively $500,000 over 2 years and up to a little over $800,000 in wasted time that was just opening files.
Yep.
And he might ping and tell me I'm right or wrong with those numbers.
Payback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Let's continue talking about this. I want to talk about that open and close time on your real models in a minute here to kind of dig a little deeper on that. But let's continue talking down these numbers. I still haven't gotten to the number where you were talking 74, or maybe this is the number where you were talking about getting
model
74, 72.
Correct.
Yeah, Anthony,
yeah.
What is yours so far?
That was kind of regarding that 72. That was at 1080p. Now keep in mind, when you run this benchmark, if you're at 1080p, 1440p, or 4K, it will affect your score. Right. But even at 4K, that number was about like 74, 75 seconds. And that was on an i5.
And is that this number here, or is that a render number?
That's correct.
No,
that was the total.
Okay.
And that was kind of like an experiment to kind of open people's minds that it's all core speed. It's clock speed. That was a 5.2 gigahertz i5 it was either 38 or 4000 megahertz RAM. And someone recently literally archived all the benchmarks into an Excel sheet, and they were wondering like, hey, is this right? The fastest CPU was an i5. And it's just clock speed. RAM played a role in that. And not to say that I'd recommend people just go out and buy i5s, because you're not just doing one thing all day long. But it was just to create a point.
Yeah. Again, the whole goal here is talk about what the use of the computer is for. We don't only do Revit. It is one of the primary things we do, but it's not all we do. So while we can't do like what a Formula One racer does or what a drag strip racer does and tune for that one thing, because we do have to be somewhat multifunctional, you still want to think about what are the main uses. So like you said, an i5 probably isn't the best call for most people.
Right. It helps for people that just don't have the budget, but because it's going to blow away any laptop, just because we were talking about thermals earlier. An i7 in a laptop at the end of the day it's just going to run out of steam. But I would still go i7 or higher on a desktop.
Right.
Well,
I think so.
One of the reasons
you can cool it.
Yeah. Right. One of the reasons, this is Anthony was trying to get me to build an i5 desktop and introduce it to the line, which we are doing. One of the things that we thought why the i5 performed better, and when I said i5 performed better, I mean I've had 64 gigabytes of DDR4000 RAM with crazy rate setups, overclocked to 5.3 gigahertz with tons of voltage on demo systems, just trying to beat Anthony's score. But what it came down to was the i5 wasn't hyper-threaded. It only had 8 cores. It didn't go to 16 threads. So we believe you had a higher memory cache per core. And that was one of the things that was driving that single core speed. It had more cache on the CPU to actually be able to crunch those numbers. Otherwise, I don't have an explanation other than Anthony just did something that miraculous.
Yeah, so if you get like an i7, that's basically an i5 with hyperthreading enabled, and you disable hyperthreading, you can now have more cache available, and it will beat out an i5. And the only thing that's really different between the two is the cache. So therefore, the i5 in general versus a hyperthreaded i7, we suspect that was because of there was just no hyper-threading. The cores were just maxed out and running, 100%. Although in Revit, if you watch it, it's not running at 100% on the CPU, but it's just, I guess, easier on the architecture. Not quite sure, just honestly.
Right. So let's go back to this RFO here, because there's other points in this benchmark that I think are very meaningful, right? You're talking the modeling process right here, creating a model and what its total score is. And again, I've got scores from other computers, and oddly enough, I was surprised by this. My sales spec'd laptop that isn't Revit spec'd beat out a workstation that was built just like 3 years or 4 years ago. It was purpose built for BIM, and I beat it. And there's multi-factors there. I didn't beat it by much.
Yeah.
Mind you. It's not much. Like, we're talking 20 seconds, and I'm still above 120. So I'm not bragging here. This laptop is probably like marginal for 2010 if we're talking top-end laptops. But there's another workstation over here. This is a 3-year-old Box X laptop that scored 94. It beat me, but it's still above that 80, right? Like, it's still not optimal.
Well, that's a pretty good score for a laptop. That's that's a solid score for a 3-year-old laptop. Going back to the workstation you're showing in the middle, though, I just came from the MCAA technology event, and we had to have a discussion about what makes a workstation a BIM workstation. Because when I was at Balfour, they handed me a BIM workstation and a BIM workstation laptop, but that was a 4-core Xeon or a dual Xeon workstation that had an abysmal clock speed of like 1.2, and just because a manufacturer called it a BIM workstation, it wasn't the best thing for me. So by all intents and purposes, your laptop could beat a BIM workstation.
Right.
That's a very loosely defined term right now, and that's something that
Right.
Anthony and I are kind of constantly working to overcome.
And to be fair, right, like I with my demos, I'm intentionally not opening up like 300-400 meg models. And if my business model was, sub 100 meg files or sub 150 meg files, this laptop's going to perform acceptably. It's not a big deal, right? But in reality, most of the models that I actually encounter from a support aspect are usually 200 meg plus. And this laptop isn't going to be optimal in a daily performance in that environment. So for what I'm doing right now, it's okay.
Yep.
But it's not great, right? So
no, and I think
John, how's it going, by the way? How y'all doing? We got John jumping in. We've got let's see, Bob Beckerbauer. Hey Bob. Hey Kurt. Hey Matt. Welcome to the stream here today.
Hey Shawn, I just emailed you one of our earlier results. This was before we threw in the fast RAM. It's a 77-second run on the i5. Sure. I gotta dig deeper to find that 72 or 74-second one, but if you wanted to load that up, you could compare on your side some of the numbers we got with the i5.
Sounds good.
If you're curious.
Wait for that to show up here. Once it shows up, I'll pull it up there on that right screen for you.
And Shawn, someone asked a good question while we were at the MCA roundtable for hardware. They said, my computer, I have a BIM workstation, it runs slow. Is this something I just have to say it's an Autodesk problem, or is there hardware out there that can make Revit run well? And I think, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, with the hardware that's available today, CPU, graphics card, RAM, solid state drives, the hardware is available for you to have a good experience, from a 20 meg Revit file to a 5 gigabyte Revit file. It's out there. We have to deal with the software that's at hand, but there is hardware today that can make you have a really good experience, regardless of what the size of the file and regardless of how much RAM you're using. We can get a system, and there's a system out there that is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some things that just aren't instant, but when you see an architect smile because something just took 2 seconds that used to take 10,
right?
Yeah, that's the difference, really.
It's taking you 20% the original time. It's a savings of 80% of your time. Every time you do that task, that's 80% savings. So
I mean, we
Well,
can't measure the fatigue, but like the mental wear, like when you're in a rush and you're trying to get things done and your computer's just not having it, that's so frustrating. Like, I mean,
Absolutely. In fact, let's talk a little bit about that. So we spoke about that one score right there. In fact, I keep jumping around a little bit. We still haven't gotten through the rest of this benchmark and talked through what some of these numbers are. There's some export data here, and I like that they broke this out. When this was written, it's very specific to different types of exports. Those of you who are constantly doing things like PDF prints, vector PDF prints, there is time savings to be gained on that front with, where is it at here? Let's get to the same location. There we go. Apples to apples here with those exports, right? And that's, again, a percentage of time savings. Every time you do a print set, every time you kick out a bunch of DWGs for consultants and you're sitting there waiting for this to happen, this right here is time savings. And that's money, right? Every week, every month, every other week, whatever the interval is, that's money. So it's money that you're either spending by paying people, or you're spending by getting faster workstations and making everything faster in general, right? So you're going to spend it one way or the other, and that's the reality.
I used to hate exporting all new sheets from this $10,000 awesome. I'm not even in the manufacturer. It was a beautiful machine. It just wasn't good for it. But I mean, I would literally go to lunch and come back still exporting XREFs and sheets on projects, and it was just nightmarish. I can only imagine an architect having to do that throughout the day would just be, I mean, it'd eat you alive.
Anthony, I haven't seen that link come through yet.
Let me resend it. It was to the broadcast email. Let me just create a new one.
Theoretically, should come in. I sent you an email that you can reply to, and then you can send it to that replied email. It'll come straight to me.
Oh, okay, perfect. Let me do that one.
You know,
I want to get that pulled up so we can do an apples, or we can. Well, we'll do kind of a showdown here between the Box X and the BIMBOX right here live on BIM broadcast.
it wasn't
you, but we'll do it.
You know.
It was an earlier run in 2018, so it may not be the same version. And keep in mind, this time I'm also sending you something with an AMD processor. It was an 1800X.
Ooh, AMD! Oh, Buck, you're flinching over there. You're flinching.
Not a BIMBOX.
We don't use AMD, but we don't use the AMD setup. But it's a good conversation. Whereas, hey, I got the top of the line AMD, and it's still, I mean, there's laptops that are as fast. So
right. So John's calling you out there, Anthony. He made a great point. He was saying the stress of a machine hanging is so real. You know, when you got a deadline, that's no joke.
Yeah.
And that emotional slowness, regardless of the actual slowness, the emotional slowness, when something is working not at its optimal speed, and you know that, or you feel that way, man, that just does not feel good. So there's a morale that goes into this as well.
Oh yeah, I hate that, man. It's frustrating.
Yeah, you're right. It is sometimes people just want to have bragging rights, but there's also that you know, I feel like I'm going slow, therefore I'm going slow kind of feeling, which is why some people
it's almost
get
like
heavy feet.
Your brain, your thoughts go on lag, right? I mean, when you sit down to execute and you know what you're trying to do, and you start clicking, and it takes a couple seconds, your mind's slowing down, right? You're not working as fast as you should be.
Right.
You have a mental lag. Oh, that's a pretty good score.
So it's not truly apples to apples because it's a simplified set, not the full standard set. So it might be a few other things happening here, but let's just kind of get this lined up a little bit so we can
there's simplified. Go.
No, it's simplified standard.
Oh.
That's all right though. But we can get
our computers
mostly line up.
Like the extended test. The reason being is if you don't have proper cooling, you'll get a 30% hit, up to a 30% hit over 8 hours.
Right. In fact, I'm going to try to do an extended test on this laptop. I'll do an extended test on my older, release 1 Box X laptop. And then again, when I get that one from you guys, we'll be doing an extended run test on yours as well. And then we'll do a true apples to apples because I'll have a full controlled environment as best as possible. And I'm sure this laptop is just going to tank because this thing is not built to do stress testing. So, but yeah, here's your 77 score there, and we're doing the exact same things, right? So even though this is a simplified test, it's still doing more or less the same stuff, just there's a couple of things that might not be doing, like it's not doing the exporting portion. But you can
Correct.
still do more or less an apples to apples here on the model creation.
Yep.
So in this case, we've got some things that are somewhat similar, right? Opening and loading a custom template, that's pretty basic, pretty easy. Creating the floors and levels, that's somewhat similar. It's still pretty easy. But when you get down here to some of these other metrics, like creating the area plans or changing curtain wall panels, there's a 30% increase in some of those numbers, right? And all told, this is the older Box X at a score of 94.5, and we've got a 1-year-old build of your guys's that's at about 77.71. So there's definitely an increase in performance here. And if we wanted to scroll down and just kind of take a look at what's going on for specs wise, and again, this isn't, that jumped funny. It doesn't necessarily give you all of the information that you might want, because like you said, it reports the lowest, the system recorded information, not like the boost information. So.
Right, and ours was at 5.2 gigahertz, even though it says 3.8 there.
Right, that's
one thing you notice.
Yeah, so you were running at 5.2.
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Buck.
No, you're good. If you look at the view, when you rotate a view, that's a big one. You get it when bigger models. When Shawn, you get that everybody, you start rotating and the model disappears, and then it reappears, and you zoom in a little bit and it disappears, and it starts redrawing.
Yep.
That's a big one for Revit users. Anyone that's doing detail work, and even CAD, when you start trying to deal with big files and refresh them and look at different angles, that's when you start to get that lag. It starts, shifting and redrawing. So that's an important one for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to pull this back up here again. When you're looking at these specs, this is the system reported. This isn't what you're overclocking. This isn't what you're turboing or what it can, spool up to. Same thing with the RAM, right? The RAM speed is what the system reports, not necessarily what you guys are tweaking there.
Yeah, and actually I may have been mistaken. It may have been the CPU speed it doesn't report, because that run was at 2666. I'd have to find our other run. When we got into that 72, 74 range, that's when we stepped it up with the actual RAM speed, and we were both blown away that it made such a large difference. But losing a couple seconds on an already really fast run, and that was just showed us like, wow, RAM really matters.
Right. So going back to what you said earlier, Anthony, you were saying the most important thing is CPU, but again, it's a fully tuned system. It's not just one thing. I mean, you can never just go, the CPU makes it. Because if you just take a CPU and sit it on your desk, I mean, you got a CPU sitting on your desk.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, even it goes into, man, even like some motherboard manufacturers, they'll do their RAM, right? Well, every motherboard has RAM slots, but there's two different ways of them doing the traces. So even the motherboard matters significantly. Stress testing, and I want to keep it real simple on this one, but it's a whole package. Aaron Maller actually told us how one of his clients kind of did a copycat system of it wasn't even an overclocked workstation I built, and they just wanted to save money, so they had someone build one. They copied my specs. Right. And Aaron was laughing. He's like, dude, they could never get it to run as fast as yours. And they got the same parts. And I'm like, yeah, because there's a little bit of manual stuff behind the scenes you got to do.
Man, you got to polish and port those injection ports, man.
Exactly. No, that's exactly the automotive. Yeah. It's like dyno tuning, adjusting voltages, fan speed curves, all kinds of stuff. So.
Yep, absolutely. So Matthew Haflin was saying he has yet to get an extended test to actually finish. He's usually failing with some kind of a runtime error. Do you guys have you seen that problem? Is that with the RFO benchmark, or is that with like the Revit situation, running out of RAM or running out of resources?
There's a lot of reasons that can happen, and it's best to jump into the RFO forum to kind of get help from blanking out on the gentleman's name that created it, because sometimes there are bugs in the benchmark as well, and so he needs feedback just to make sure it's not a benchmark issue. It could be running out of RAM.
Price, by the way.
Correct, Gordon. It could be RAM, it could be a bug in the system, it could be a lot of things. But it could be a system. Go ahead, Buck.
Oh, I was gonna say Gordon's really good to get back to you on this stuff. I mean, it's one of those things that
Yeah.
that RFO, the forum is a great place to go for anything. But Gordon is real quick to respond back, or someone else to jump in. So this is a great place to go for anything.
Right.
But on the benchmarking, you're right. Yeah, when it does fail, it's typically there's something in there that has shown that someone else has experienced, and there's a quick change to get it fixed and running again.
Yep. Now, also, if you're able to get things like the standard test to complete, you know that RFO is running, right? So
Correct.
Personal suspicion at a core level, just without looking at the system there, Matthew, would be probably what's going on is the system's running out of RAM or something else is conflicting. I would try to get your system as clean as possible, like restart, do a fresh start, just run it, don't open up email, don't have peripheral stuff running, close all that Autodesk communicator garbage, like whatever you can do to free up some resources, see what you can free up. And then also, I would personally probably have the task manager open just so I can see what's going on. And if I'm seeing everything just spike out and then I get that message, that would be a pretty clear indicator. So just some quick troubleshooting on that front. That way you can do a full extended.
And turn your screensaver off and make sure your computer doesn't go to sleep.
Yeah, turn off the lock screen, stuff like that, so that it stays in a static, environment.
Yeah.
All right. So, guys, we've gone way over the time I was planning. We're already 50 minutes into our discussion today, and I figured this was going to happen because this is how it always goes. We get talking about something, and time just flies when you're having fun. So, what we're going to do here, I'm just going to pull up, make sure I haven't talked about anything else or missed something I want to talk to. Let's see, topics for upcoming shows. All right. That's an important one that I want to definitely nail down, or at least kind of throw out there before we get going too far. So in upcoming shows, we have a few ideas on our sides, talking about things like the short bus, the front side bus, the long bus. Like what are we talking about? We're talking about bus speeds and things like that, or processors and RAM versus Dodge or Ford, right? Like we want to make sure we're getting terminologies nailed down here. So those of you who are watching live, throw us some comments back and say, hey, talk about these things. I want to know about how this aspect of workstations affects, my Revit speed. I want to know about how maybe this affects other things like Enscape or Revisto or whatever, right? We're gonna try and hit a number of topics, and it's going to be entirely or as much as possible user driven. So we appreciate those of you who showed up today and giving us some feedback and saying what's up. We're going to be looking for that in future. And in fact, in future giveaway entry points, it's going to be live only in a lot of cases. So you guys come to the show and interact with us. Buck, Anthony, what are some of the topics that we want to talk about straight away? We'll just kind of throw these out there so people go, yep, they're going to cover that. And then if there's something we missed, they can kind of chime in.
Anthony, I'll let you go first.
Uh-oh, I think I lost Anthony's audio. Yep, Anthony, I lost your audio.
Sorry, I was muted, so
there you go.
The background noise. I would say video cards for sure. It's the easiest way to spend unnecessary money.
Right?
Yeah, I would say video cards. I'd like to talk about all aspects of computers, but, whatever works for the show.
Sure. Yeah, video cards is going to be critical. I think we're going to dig deeper into processors. We mentioned that today. What was that?
Cooling systems, I think, that's very overlooked by a lot of manufacturers. So.
Right. So especially when you're talking like thin form laptops, like how do you overcome that? How do you manage that? How do you mitigate the heat?
Yeah.
That'll be an important thing to kind of discuss. Let's see, RAM for sure. Because I know there's terminology in RAM that I don't fully understand that I probably should, so it'd be good to talk about that. Yeah, Robert agrees with us about those video cards. That's going to be an important one to talk about. So,
right.
By the way, guys, I do keep an eye on that chat stream. You can see me pulling it on screen for people, for Buck and Anthony to see so that we can kind of comment back to you. So we do try to make this as interactive as possible. Feel free to hit that up. Also, if you haven't done so already, remember to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell as well. Make sure you click that bell so you can be notified when we go live. We're not going to be doing, here at BIM Broadcast, we're not going to be doing only this series. We're going to cover some other things as well. there was a tool set that I did not talk about today that I had intended to, which is how you can figure out on your own projects how to track speed. I'm going to do a special session on that in particular coming up here in maybe a week or two, so that we can really kind of nail this down, so we're not tying up hardware discussions to talk about this. But this is an important tracking metric, I think, that makes it real to life for you on your projects, and you can live compare multiple workstations simultaneously on live environments. So we'll talk about that in a future session that Buck and Anthony may not be a part of. So won't be part of the series.
You're going to cut us out of the BI section? You just brought BI to benchmarking? You're the first person I've ever known to bring BI to benchmarking. Shawn, I just have to give you one of these real quick.
Right.
That's awesome.
And no, if you guys want to participate, I'm all about bringing you to that discussion too. So
I would love to answer that discussion. That geeks me out. I think also to go with the RAM is how much RAM do you actually need? There's a very big, much debated question. Aaron, you do not, well, you might need 64 gigs. Not everybody needs 64 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, Aaron probably does need the 64s. Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things with RAM that can be talked about. It's simple, but there's things you gotta watch out for. Such as high RAM speed.
Go ahead.
Like high RAM speed, but the latency numbers and the timings are really high. So even though the speed's really high, you could actually have slower latency response. I mean, there's actually a formula for that too. So
nice. That'd be good to kind of throw out there so people can understand more about that. Kurt Johnston made a comment here. He said improvements in SSDs. Not all SSDs are created equal. That would be an important discussion, I think.
We've had some interesting results come out recently with two of the best drives out there. We've seen some that perform really well with Revit, and then we've seen some that perform well with Revit but not Navisworks. So we can throw some of that knowledge out there.
Absolutely. Matthew Haviland commented and said, how do you select a balanced system, balancing specs? So it's not just Revit, but when you've got other concerns, how do you figure out what's best for that? That'll definitely be a good discussion. Maybe we'll go through all the hardware first and then circle back around and say, now that we got all this information, how do we balance it out?
Right. Because I would hate to run out of RAM.
Yeah, right?
I'd hate to have the best CPU and not enough RAM, because then your experience would be garbage anyway. So.
Well, and Revit plus what, right? Revit plus Inkscape is different than a Revit plus Lumion. You might need more for Lumion, or Revit plus 3ds Max, or Revit plus Point Cloud, or
Revit plus Civil 3D. Let's go really complicated. Revit plus Civil 3D. That's two completely different platforms, but I got people that run that. And so how do you balance that?
We got something for that too.
Right?
Yeah.
Normally you'd think that would be two completely different graphics cards, because the two softwares want two different things and they perform better in different environments. But I'm curious to see what Anthony has to pull out of his hat for that. So we're going to leave you guys cliffhanging on that one until the next, one of the future shows. That'll get you coming back. Okay, cool. So those of you who are live, you're going to have to do this a little later on. Circle back around. You've already heard this a couple of times. Those of you who are watching the recording, we're going to give you all a chance in this show to get entered into the drawing. The question that I came up with is, what is the single factor that is the most important for a Revit workstation? What I want you to do, you've seen on a screen down here, down below, you've seen the little cards show up that we're talking about, the BIM broadcast Twitter and the BIMBOX USA Twitter. In fact, BIM broadcast is up right now. That's YouTube, actually. Never mind. But we want you to go and direct message us. So DM us and tell us your answer. We don't want you to just publicly throw it out there, because that's unfair. Everybody sees your answer then. This is like a closed book test. So DM us, either one of us, and we're going to keep track of who DMs the answer to that particular question. And in the future, we'll be doing question answers in the live chat for the drawing for the BIMBOX workstation or laptop. I don't know which one Buck was going to decide on, and a standalone seat of Project Suite from CTC's Express Tools for Revit, and we'll see if there's a third one that's coming in the future. Buck may throw one at us in the future, he said.
Shawn, why don't we go to make it live here? Anyone that's listening right now, if you run the Revit benchmark and submit it to either Shawn, me, or Anthony, however you want to submit it, You'll be entered next week. If you submit it and you come back on, you got to come back here. We'll give you a RAID card. I'll put a 1 terabyte RAID drive. It'll ship it and head out to you. But you have to send in a score, and you have to be here to hear that you won, or else we'll go to the next round.
All right, so that one you just said, that's for live players only today, right?
Live players only.
If you're here and you heard this, DM us for our email addresses if you don't already have it, but email us your RFO benchmark from which one? Which one did you want? The standard, full standard?
We want it. Let's go extended. Let's do extended one time.
Now that's not fair if they can't finish it.
Okay, let's go standard. You submit a Revit benchmark. If you submit extended, I'll give you 2 drawings. How about that? You get 2 chances to win.
All right. Oh, 2 drawings. Did you just say 2 drawings?
No. You get 2 entries. We draw.
Oh, 2 entries. Okay, so if you give me a full standard, then you're entered once. If you can do the full extended, is that the one?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Then you get entered twice for a chance to win that drive that Buck was just talking about, and he'll send it out to you once that drawing happens. So we'll
$1,300 value
what,
RAID drive.
What do you want to give them a week to do this?
We can give it. You know what? Even for the folks that might listen to you two, as long as you get your submission in by the next week, we will put you in for the drawing.
So we're gonna say, just to give an explicit date here, I'm pulling up my calendar because I want to make sure this is fair for everybody. So those who watch the recording or share it around with their buddies, Friday the 8th at 2 p.m. Central. We'll do end of day Central, so 5 p.m. Central. So Friday the 8th. That's the deadline. I'm going to put a little calendar reminder for myself and Buck, and we'll kind of check our notes, and we'll figure out who's going to win that.
And just for the record, this is an X16 NVMe RAID drive with drives. We're not just sending you a RAID card with nothing in it. You have a 1 terabyte worth of really, really fast data.
Nice.
You know, between 5 and 10 gigabytes per second throughput, depending on what you have. So it'll turn any computer really, really fast.
Excellent. All right, guys. You know what?
As long as the whole system's balanced.
Yeah,
what was that?
Well, you're gonna have some bottlenecks if that's the only thing you're upgrading, right?
Right.
At least you'll pick up data fast. All right, Buck, Anthony, thank you guys so much for your time today. I'm looking forward to seeing you in future shows. In 2 weeks, over the Central Time lunch hour, we're going to be running the show again, and we'll be going live talking about the next topic, whichever one we decide upon at the time. We'll kind of let you guys know a little ahead of time what that's going to look like via our Twitter channels. So check that Twitter feed, subscribe to both of our channels, BIMBOX USA and BIM Broadcast. So check those out, subscribe, and we'll let you know what's going on.
Awesome.
All right. Yes, Matthew, you're right. We can't DM unless we follow each other. So you better follow me and I'll follow you. I'll be keeping an eye on that. I think next week to make that a little, no, we'll keep it Twitter based. That'll be good. We'll keep it that way. Get followers.
You got to tweet.
Right? All right, guys. Peace out. We'll see you next time.
See y'all.
See ya.